As I was looking for information on another hymn, this one popped up for me, suggesting I should pay attention to it. And as I read the rich history of this hymn, which is also a favorite for me and a lot of other people, well, the history is worth hearing. Here's what I found from a Methodist site on the history of hymns. Many hymns are conceived in the throes of tragedy. Precious Lord is one such song. Thomas Dorsey was born right before 1900 in Georgia. His father was a Baptist preacher, and his mother was a piano teacher. He is known as the father of black gospel music. Dorsey combined African American church hymns with blues and jazz. This was a pretty novel concept, a pretty worldly approach, and it was not without controversy at first, but it set the tone for gospel music for decades. Dorsey was reared in Atlanta from the age of 5, where he came in contact with the musical sounds of blues. He moved to Chicago at the age of 15 and studied at the Chicago College of Composition and Arranging, and began playing at nightclubs under a variety of names as a young man. Dorsey started to play rent parties, which is something I'd never heard of before, house parties in which tenants would hire a musician or a band to play for a party and pass the hat to pay money for the rent. The rent party played a major role in the development of jazz and blues music. Dorsey put together the Wildcats Jazz Band to play for Ma Rainey in 1925. His wife Nettie was Rainey's wardrobe mistress. After suffering a severe illness in 1926, Dorsey was converted and became a Christian in 1928. And he became really active at Pilgrim Baptist Church in Chicago. Beginning in 1932, he served as the church's choir director and continued to serve in that capacity for 40 years. Of his 1,000 musical works, at least 200 of those were gospel songs. He promoted serving as the organization's president of the National Association of Gospel Choirs and Choruses. Black musicians during the pre-Civil War era often formed their own publishing companies in order to make their music available to people, and he began the Thomas A. Dorsey Gospel Song Music Publishing Company, a publisher of inexpensive gospel blues music. Even though he had hundreds of jazz and blues songs to his credit, he turned to gospel music, one of the first to use that term, following the tragic death of Nettie and their infant son in 1932. Dorsey provides an account of the circumstances surrounding the composition of this famous song. Back in 1932, I was 32 years old and a fairly new husband. My wife Nettie and I were living in a little apartment in Chicago's South Side. One hot August afternoon, I had to go to St. Louis, where I was to be a featured soloist at a large revival meeting. I didn't want to go. Nettie was in the last month of pregnancy with our first child, but a lot of people were expecting me in St. Louis. In the steaming St. Louis heat, the crowd called on me to sing again and again. When I finally sat down, a messenger boy ran up with a Western Union telegram. I ripped open the envelope, pasted on the yellow sheet were the words, "Your wife just died." When I got back, I learned that Nettie had given birth to a boy. I swung between grief and joy, yet that night, the baby died. I buried Nettie and our little boy together in the same casket. Then I fell apart. For days I closeted myself. I felt that God had done me an injustice. I didn't want to serve him anymore or write gospel songs. I just wanted to go back to that jazz world I once knew so well. But still I was lost in grief. Everyone was kind to me, especially a friend, Professor Fry, who seemed to know what I needed. On the following Saturday evening, he took me up to Malone Poro College, a neighborhood music school. It was quiet. The late evening sun crept through the curtained windows. I sat down at the piano, and my hands began to browse over the keys. Dorsey remembered the old pentatonic scale, a 5-note melody from his Sunday school days, Maitland, paired with the text, "Must Jesus bear the cross alone?" Arranging this tune and adding his own words, "Precious Lord" became the most famous of his many gospel songs. He gave the song to Fry, who introduced it to the choir at Atlanta Ebenezer Baptist Church the next Sunday. An event day, Dorsey later remarked, tore up the church. Martin Luther King Sr. was a pastor of Ebenezer at this time, beginning his ministry there in 1931. The three stanzas capture the grief not only of Dorsey, but also of any who suffered significant loss. The insipid opening line of stanza 1, "Precious Lord, take my hand," indicates a suffering soul that's reaching out. The singer acknowledges that they were at the end of their rope. "I'm tired, I'm weak, I'm worn." Perhaps Dorsey was referring to Matthew chapter 8, the narrative where Christ stills the storm when he penned, "Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light." Stanza 2 draws upon the imagery of a journey, one in which the way grows drear. The traveler cries out and once again reaches for the hand of Christ. The third stanza begins, "When the darkness appears," reminiscent of Psalm 23, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." By the time we reach the third stanza, the terrain has changed from a stormy sea in stanza 1, a long road in stanza 2, to a river of hope, stanza 3. Upon singing, "At the river I stand," the singer reaches at last the final decision, the symbolic Jordan River. Each stanza concludes effectively with the refrain, "Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home." Perhaps an image of the Good Shepherd in the Gospel of John. Precious Lord has been recorded by many famous singers, including Elvis Presley, Mahalia Jackson, Roy Rogers, and Tennessee Ernie Ford. Martin Luther King Jr. drew inspiration from this, his favorite song. It was sung at the rally in Memphis in the night before his civil rights leader's assassination. President Lyndon B. Johnson requested that "Precious Lord" be sung at his funeral. So here we are in the midst of yet another civil rights movement, amidst a global pandemic, amidst our personal worries and stresses and maybe even some depression and frustration. And we too pray to God to take our hand and lead us home. Feel free to sing and pray along.